Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. I hope you had a great weekend. I took this photograph of the sunrise from the ground floor early this morning at about 7:15, and I hope you like it. I was looking away from my office. I'd like to thank Mr. and Mrs. Pradeep Panrana for a lovely Sunday lunch yesterday at their house. Most enjoyable. And I'd like to thank Manoj Changarampat for a super mind speak. We're in the edit suite. I thank Fareed of Nusu Nusu for the live stream. And we trended across Kenya, which was great. And it was a wonderful session, actually. And lots of interesting points. And I'll come back to them when I've got the filmed footage up on the site. But Samsung's basically working through local indigenous entrepreneurs when it comes to their retail strategy. And Manoj said many things, but the one that stuck in my mind was the huge opportunity is the 95% of 22 million Kenyans accessing the internet through the mobile, and I don't think he's wrong. I'd like to thank Bonnie Tunya, David Williams, and Tumisho of CNBC for having me on their show earlier today. Macro thoughts go back to something I wrote, I think, last month about how the new normal is a very arrhythmic world, and indeed it is. Home thoughts go to Rainer Maria Rilke. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is in its deepest essence something helpless that wants our love. Political reflections. I'll start with Pankaj Mishra writing in Bloomberg View. This week's referendum in Scotland could result in the United Kingdom losing almost 1/3 of its landmass, 8% of its population, and very likely its present Prime Minister. Governments everywhere that are unable to guarantee equitable growth and social welfare have suffered a fatal decay of legitimacy. This has been registered so far mostly by low voting percentages, political apathy more broadly, or drastic upsurge in support for challenges to the status quo from non-elite backgrounds such as Joko Widodo in Indonesia and Marina Silva in Brazil. Events in Scotland outline a more radical possibility likely to be fulfilled in Europe itself in a few weeks when Catalonia may vote to secede from Spain. Disaffected citizens can move very quickly to reject unrepresentative governments by breaking up entire nation-states. A quick glance at the last wave of self-determination in the early 20th century shows that inept governance and loss of sovereignty, as much as foolish wars and economic crises, can be preludes to swift political fragmentation. Few people in 1900 expected centuries-old empires King, Habsburg, Ottoman to collapse by 1918. Yet they struggled to cope with the energies unleashed by the rapid growth of commerce and communications in the first wave of globalization. He's a great writer. The revolution in communications, for instance, has radicalized people as much as it has facilitated faster movements of trade and finance. Mobile phones are as likely to promote successionist passions as efficient commerce and national unity. The world today seems full of examples of decayed political systems that have frittered away their legitimacy. They are vulnerable to being undermined rapidly by anarchic revolts from within. Scotland's referendum will happen at a great remove from the failed or failing states of our time, whatever its result may be. It has at least alerted us to other possible earthquakes along the political fault lines of today's world. And I tweeted, and I can't remember the exact tweet, but last week I said the world is spinning apart and fragmenting at an alarming velocity. Scotland, Ukraine, Kurdistan, Iraq. This photograph caught my attention. A man looks through shattered glass at a scene of a suicide attack at a government compound in Ghazni, Afghanistan. And then this caught my attention. US will use ISIS airstrikes in Syria as air cover for rebels and hit Syrian military targets. And that is essentially the redirection risk about which I've spoken before. I'll also post a photograph of Bashar Assad and his wife Asma at an exhibition in Paris. David Cameron tweeted on September the 14th, "The murder of David Haines is an act of pure evil. My heart goes out to his family, who have shown extraordinary courage and fortitude." And The Guardian posted an audio of David Haines' killer issuing threats to David Cameron. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. And then there was this photograph of the video showing David Cawthorne Haines kneeling on a bare hill under the open sky, and it's clear it's the same executioner. And I wrote about this previously on the August 25th, saying there was a spookiness about the British accent of the apparent, allegedly hip-hop artist Abdel Barry El Jinni, lyricist Djinn Jihadi John. And I said, IS and the likes of Al-Shabaab have proven accomplished and frightening and frightful exponents of the 21st century digital ecosystem. And what is so fascinating is that their media efforts all point to the Western world. I'll put up a photograph of Abdel Barry, a screen capture. He was known as El Jinni, lyricist Djinn, which is a play on the word Jinn, which is an Arabic word, and jinns are the supernatural creatures in Islamic mythology. The Quran says the jinn are made of a smokeless and scorching fire, but are also physical in nature, being able to interfere physically with people and objects and likewise be acted upon. They are usually invisible to humans, but humans do appear clearly to jinn as they can possess them. Jinn have the power to travel large distances at extreme speeds and are thought to live in remote areas, mountains, seas, trees, and the air in their own communities. Currency markets, when I started writing this in the morning, the euro had popped to about 129.61. When I looked last, it was back down to around the 129.40 level. Dollar index above 84.25, Japanese yen 107.18, Swissy 0.9336, the pound 162.38, the Aussie 0.9012 fell to 0.90 for the first time since March, actually. India rupee 61.04. It's a story of dollar strength across the board. South Korean won 1037.15, touched 1040. And that was the lowest level since August the 8th. The won fell 1.1% last week. Rial, last trading 233.77, retreated 1.1% in Sao Paulo, fell 3.5% last week, was the biggest fall amongst 24 emerging market currencies that Bloomberg tracks. Egyptian pound, a little bit firmer, better news on GDP 713.10. South African rand, now that's broken down at 11.0504. Chinese industrial output rose 6.9% from a year earlier in August. Average median forecast was 8.8%, so considerably below. This is down from 9% in July, and this is the slowest pace outside the Lunar New Year holiday period of January and February since December 2008. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. I think, as I said previously, it's going to soar after this pause for breath. 84 to 84.75 is a congestion zone on the charts. Euro dollar 129.61 when I was looking at it earlier, but I think it's softer now. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart. The dollar has surged against the yen. That's on a yield basis. It's more attractive to hold dollars now. Sterling, I'm going to put up a 1-year chart, 162.36. No fewer than 4 polls were released over the weekend, 3 of which continue to show the no campaign ahead. The fourth, a survey by ICM Research for the Sunday Telegraph, put yes ahead by the greatest ever margin, leading by 8 percentage points. And sterling has eased 1.2% to 162.44. Remember, it touched 160.52 on September 10th, a level not seen since November 15. Heineken apparently have confirmed SAB Miller have made a bid, but they've confirmed that they're rebuffing it. The founding family owns just over 50% of Heineken. Commodity markets, the Bloomberg Commodity Index of 22 futures dropped as much as 0.4% to 120.8102, which is the lowest level since July 2009. The gauge has lost 3.9% this year, set for a 4th year of declines. Brent crude poised to close at the lowest level in more than 2 years. Corn and soybeans near 2010 lows. I think, some of this sort of counter-sanction action by Russia in particular has put further pressure on the commodity complex. Gold, I'll put up a 3-month chart, last trading at 1234.17. You will remember my objective was 1240, and we've gone through that now. I'm having a look at it again. It dropped as low as 1225.67, headed for a first quarterly loss this year. And of course, the Bloomberg dollar spot index has accelerated 4.7% since the end of June, and that's put pressure on the commodity complex. Crude oil, I'll put up a 3-month chart, were lower than levels of 93, where I thought we were going to find some support, but we've entered a much more volatile and fluid environment, and I think more longs have cut their position, so we're at $90.46. Front month futures on Brent are headed for the lowest close since 2012. And interestingly, I saw a report on Beyond BRICS. If you compare emerging markets with frontier markets continue to soar, rose for a 6th day running on Friday, taking the gauges gain this last week to 1.6%, and it's at the highest level since 2008. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, I saw this report, Ebola in the air, a nightmare that could happen. Today, the Ebola virus spreads only through direct contact with bodily fluids such as blood and vomit, but some of the nation's top infectious disease experts worry that this deadly virus could mutate and be transmitted just by a cough or a sneeze. It's the single greatest concern I've ever had in my 40-year public health career, said Dr. Michael Osterholm. I can't imagine anything in my career, and this includes HIV, that would be more devastating to the world than a respiratory transmissible Ebola virus. Now that is the tail risk around Ebola. Osterholm and other experts couldn't think of another virus that has made the transition from non-airborne to airborne in humans. They say the chances are relatively small that Ebola will make that jump. But as the virus spreads, they warn the likelihood increases. Every time a new person gets Ebola, the virus gets another chance to mutate and develop new capabilities. Osterholm calls it genetic roulette. As of Friday, there have been 4,784 cases of Ebola with 2,400 deaths. Ebola is an RNA virus, which means every time it copies itself, it makes 1 or 2 mutations. Many of those mutations mean nothing, but some of them might be able to change the way the virus behaves inside the human body. Imagine every time you copy an essay, you change a word or 2. Eventually it's going to change the meaning of the essay, said Dr. C.J. Peters, one of the heroes featured in The Hot Zone. That book chronicles the 1989 outbreak of Ebola Reston, which was transmitted among monkeys by breathing. In 2012, Canadian researchers found that Ebola Zaire, which is involved in the current outbreak, was passed from pigs to monkeys in the air. Dr. James Leduc said the problem is that no one is keeping track of the mutations across West Africa, so that no one really knows what the virus has become. One group of researchers looked at how Ebola changed over a short period of time in just one area in Sierra Leone, early on in the outbreak, before it was spreading as fast as it is now. They found more than 300 genetic changes in the virus. It's frightening to look at how much this virus mutated within just 3 weeks, said Dr. Pardis Sabeti. Even without becoming airborne, the virus has overwhelmed efforts to stop it. And then the Pentagon apparently announced a 25-bed hospital, but somebody's saying a 25-bed hospital with nobody to staff it. That's not the scale we need to be thinking about. This is largely dysfunctional. Nobody's in command. Nobody's in charge. He said it's like not having aircraft control at an airport. The planes would just crash into each other. Then I learned from Bloomberg that a black market for an Ebola treatment derived from the blood of survivors is emerging. If you haven't had a chance to look at our Al Jazeera story, inside story, please do have a look at that. I like this photograph of boys playing football in the rain in Freetown after the government cancelled classes because of the Ebola epidemic. The South African all-share eked out a 0.03% gain on Friday. It remains 10.7899% higher this year. Dollar Rand, I'll put up a 6-month chart that's broken down through key support. It's now at 11.05, and we could see if the dollar gets stronger, all of a sudden we could see a sharp push towards the 11.50 level. I'll put up a 3-month chart in Egyptian pound that remains firm. Egypt's GDP grew 3.5% in the fourth quarter of the 2013-2014 fiscal year. I think that will be accepted as a better than expected outcome. Egyptian EGX 30 eased 0.5%. It's up 39% this year and at multi-year highs and second only to Dar es Salaam. Nigerian all-share edged 0.21% lower. That's at 14-week lows. That's negative 1.589% for the year. Nigeria's inflation rose for the 6th consecutive month to 8.5% in August. Food inflation also climbed to 10% in August. The Nigerian military says one of its airplanes is missing in the northeast. The Nigerian military said on Sunday one of its fighter jets that was operating in a northeastern state where the armed forces are fighting Islamist Boko Haram militants had gone missing. A search and rescue operation was underway for the Nigerian Air Force Alpha jet, which was on a routine operational mission on Friday over Adamawa State when contact was lost with the aircraft, the Nigerian Armed Forces said in a statement. My conclusions are this might mark the moment of a trend change in Boko Haram's military capacity. And as I said recently, on the 8th of September, the insurgency tail risk remains, and how it plays out will have important consequence for ourselves and the entire African rising narrative. The Ghana Stock Exchange rallied on Friday 0.92%. It's at a 4-week high. It's up 4.1025% this year. The SEDI rallied every day last week to close up 5.5% for its biggest weekly increase since January 2000. It's still down 34% year to date. Ghana sold Eurobonds due in January 2026, $1 billion at a rate better than expected. So there was some short covering, I think, that went on. Problems remain, but essentially a better performance. East Africa tops Africa for internet access and connectivity. Kenya currently leads in African connectivity with the highest bandwidth per person on the continent, the fastest speeds and some of the lowest internet costs, according to a presentation held by Liquid Telecom Kenya's CEO Ben Roberts. Investment in the continent's connectivity is creating multiple benefits that Kenya demonstrates as a clear example of a virtuous circle where each investment accelerates the next with an ever-increasing footprint of beneficiaries. Kenya has achieved a confluence in infrastructure and provision that has positioned it with the highest growth in internet take-up compared to income per capita in Africa. It has effectively become an outlier in its internet take-up. And I wrote about this in February 2010 when I said the light has been flicked on in Africa. I was talking about a time when I used to receive an aerogram 15,000 mobile phones, and how that, basically the mobile internet has brought 1 billion Africans who were previously on the subs bench back onto the pitch. Manoj said Wi-Fi is a human right at Mindspeak, and he's not wrong. Interesting piece on Beyond BRICS. Africa's most valuable commodity is information. I've been saying that for a while. Tanzania's share index has rallied 71% in 2014, and the highest rally amongst 17 gauges tracked by Bloomberg. Tanga, which is a small town in Tanzania, is preparing its debut bond, and this is the Tanga Local Council looking to raise $6 million. This will be the first municipal bond, I think, in Tanzania. Coming to Kenya, the price of petroleum products fell sharply by the biggest margin since January 2012. The ERC cut the maximum price of super petrol in Nairobi by 4 shillings and 98 cents per litre, lowered the price of diesel by 0.62 a litre. Inflation, of course, increased to 8.36% in August from 7.67% in July. A lot of people were expecting a rate hike. I wasn't, because of the price performance of crude oil. And I wrote about that on the 1st of September when I said the most important inverse correlation for the shilling is with the price of crude oil. And I was talking then about how crude oil had retreated, and I was expecting exactly this outcome. My piece over the weekend was self-listing and the coming of age of the Nairobi Securities Exchange. I attended the bell-ringing ceremony of the Nairobi Securities Exchange's self-listing at the exchange last week. This marked the moment when 66 million shares, the stake that shares that the NSE had sold to the public, began trading. The NSE sold shares at 9 shillings 50 cents. The offer was oversubscribed 6.6 times. In Kenya, dealing in shares began in the 1920s, and trading took place on the basis of a gentleman's agreement in the exchange bar at the Sarova Stanley. In 1951, an estate agent named Francis Drummond established the first professional stockbroking firm. In July 1953, London recognized the setting up of the Nairobi Stock Exchange as an overseas stock exchange. It is interesting to note that the present Lord Mayor of the City of London, Fiona Woolf, will be visiting Nairobi tomorrow, and I said this is recognition of a strong relationship with the City of London that is almost a century old. Under the leadership of the CEO, Peter Mwangi, once a Kenya Air Force fighter pilot, the Nairobi Securities Exchange has reinvigorated its relationship with London, and I'm sure has a suite of products sitting on the launch pad. UK Inc. still holds more than 50% of the value of the NSE via the likes of Vodafone, Diageo, Helios, and others. Africans and Asians were only permitted to trade in securities after Kenya's independence in 1963. It was not until 1988 that Nairobi saw the first privatization through the NSE, a sale of a 20% government stake in the Kenya Commercial Bank. The NSE moved to Nation Centre in July 1994, and last year moved again to about 100 metres from my office here in Westlands Road. The plan to self-list was hatched deep in the jaws of the post-2007 bear market, when a number of our stockbrokers collapsed like a house of cards, and the old-style club-like governance structure that was found to be badly wanting. What is clear is that it is in our national interest to have a thriving securities exchange and capital markets. The NSE's IPO surged to 72.63% on the first day, and I told Katrina Manson of the FT, this is the type of price action you want. It is a very small, bite-sized IPO, price to clear, which is why we've had a nice pop and people got behind it. The NSE stock closed at 21.50 on Friday. It's trading at 23.50 today. So through last week, it served up 126.31% return versus its issue price. I said it probably represents an open sesame moment, and I expect more public offerings after a long period of inaction. The privatization program the Kibaki government undertook in its first term was, in my opinion, a marvelously progressive program. It increased ownership levels in our society and magicked 2 million shareholders out of the air. The terminal mistake, at least until this IPO last week, was to think the government needed to squeeze every cent out of the price. The bottom line is this: there is a supersized pipeline of shares that need to be sold to the public. Think of the energy pipeline as just one example. The key issue is to sell cheap, make sure buyers have a profit, and keep the pipeline greased and lubricated. This will create a positive feedback loop and politically will tip the balance convincingly in the president's favor. Mrs. Margaret Thatcher won a record-breaking 3 terms in the United Kingdom on the basis of expanding the ownership society. You do not expand the ownership society by leaving citizens, shareholders nursing losses. To do so is practically criminal negligence. You leave them with profits, like the Nairobi Securities Exchange did last week. This tribe of 2 million shareholders are worthy of our politicians' attention because they can tip the balance. Therefore, I'm now looking forward to a slew of well-priced IPOs and a return of the feel-good factor. I'll put up a link for the 2 speeches made by the CEO Peter Mwangi and by the Cabinet Secretary Aden Mohammed. I'll put up a photograph of Aden Mohammed ringing the bell on that day I was talking about. The shilling was last at 88.80. Of course, it's facing down a rampant dollar at the moment. The Nairobi Oil shares up 16.67% this year and 0.505% below record high set on the 3rd of this month. NSE 20 is up 4.933% and at more than 6-year highs. Equity Bank closed yesterday at a record and will set a new record today. As of this morning, it opened up 64.22% year to date. I'll put up a photograph of their CEO, Dr. James Mwangi, Mr. Dangote, amongst others, at the Kenya-Nigeria Forum. The Nairobi Securities Exchange is up 126.315%. Kenya Orchard is up an incredible 950% and is the best performing share at the stock exchange. We're still in a bull channel here. Of course, we'll get small corrections as we've been in for a little while, but we're still headed higher. Once again, thank you for stopping by.